5. Today, our weekly lesson will be, if you look at March 23rd, we will be doing intercultural power and discipline in the family. And more or less today, we will be focusing on power and discipline and what that looks like in each respective family. In a moment, I'm going to go ahead and, as we mentioned before, um, this comes from Candace Thomas Maddox and Nicole Blau. This is part of our family com. This is the text that we do use here at Washtenaw, and so this is for educational and illustrative purposes that coincide for our adaptive release while we're dealing with the coronavirus situation. So this week, chapter 4, power and discipline in families. And as we go through this, I want you to think about what kind of family you grew up in and how or what was the discipline mechanisms that were used. Okay? First, we want to look at defining what power is. Okay? And earlier in the semester, we did discuss what power is, but what we look at is this is the ability to influence one's attitudes, beliefs, values, and communication. Right now, I know a lot of us are dealing with an enormous amount of power struggles that we deal with, whether they're in our romantic relationships, if we're dealing with our parents, if we're also dealing with our friends, etc. Okay? And when we look at defining power, they do these four things. Number one, there is a struggle for resources. Okay? Resources can be money, it can be time, it could be valuables, the car, etc. The second aspect is relational dynamic. Okay? So, what are the dynamics? Is it a parent child relationship? Is it a brother, older sister relationship? Is it a relationship with your current significant other, your wife, your husband, your spouse? Okay. The third part are social pressures. Okay. There's a lot of social pressures that all of us deal with. Take for specifically Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, TikTok, and all of that. There's an enormous amount of social pressures that all of us are faced. So, for example, if you're 35 years old, if you're 45 years old and you've never been married, there may be some societal pressures. Maybe you just don't want to get married, right? But there's pressures that society's place on us. Let's say, for example, you bought your first home and it was $80,000 and you're making six figures. You don't want to move your house, but all your friends are upgrading and living their best life and getting a 4,000 square foot home. So how do you deal with those societal pressures? And then lastly, our role issues. So when we look at power in the family specifically, who does the laundry, who cooks dinner, who is doing the child, dealing with the children. We all know that we could go to one parent typically, and we could get a different outcome than going to another parent. We knew who was strict and who was maybe more laissez-faire, if you will. So when we define power, it's the ability to influence one's attitudes, beliefs, values, and communication. So let's look at power in relationships. We have perceived, actual, and granted. Okay? So when we look at perceived power, these are perceptions of power which are highly influential. Okay? Do you have power and the other person does not assign or perceive you as having power? So, for example, a child who fails to adhere to parents' rules does not perceive parents to have the power. And some of us parents have been here before, right? Where we have a child who fails to adhere to our rules. And thus, that leads to the parents not having the power. I remember being a man, you all know that I've served management roles in the corporate retail environment. And I'll never forget one day I was walking through and there was one of my cashiers was ringing up a customer. And it was a little girl and a little boy who were in the cart. And they both proceeded to grab candy bars. I think one was a Baby Ruth and the other was like a Kit Kat or something like that. At any rate, they both picked up the candy and said it. And mother appeared, and we're not going to be judgmental. She appeared to be probably under 30. So don't make a judgment yet, because some of you all already made up in your mind how this altercation is going to go. Or not really altercation, but communication event. Nevertheless, the children, rather, put both of the candy bars up, and mom said, "No, no, we haven't had dinner yet." Me and the cashier kind of look. I said, how is this going to go? And the little girl proceeded, "I want this candy bar now." The mom had put it back on the shelf. The child got it back. Can you take a guess? Did that mom buy that candy bar for those two children? She did in that instance, right? So who had the power? So we have perceived power, and then we'll talk about actual. Some of us wouldn't play that game. Some of you out there would have a zero tolerance, and that just wouldn't have happened. So I'm not judging you based off of whether your child does that. We all have opportunities when it comes to raising our kids, but that's an example of perceived power. Okay, if they know that they're going to be grounded, you're going to take away the Nintendo Switch, you're going to take away the iPad, those children likely, not always, probably would fall in line with you. Then let's look at actual power. This is often assigned based on a role. So this can be a title or relationship status. So this could be your mommy or daddy power, okay? As mothers and fathers, we have the ability to we come over our parents, to a degree because we're next in line, right? And so a lot of us have actual power too when we look at our relationships that we deal with. So a father or a mother would be able to inflict certain rewards and punishments more or less than an aunt or an uncle or even a grandparent. Now, this doesn't mean that grandparents don't have a lot of authority. Mine specifically, it was so funny. My mother-in-law had mentioned she likes to sit down with our kids and do timetables and those type of things. And he gets dramatic when it's with my wife and I. However, she had stayed with us a weekend, and she had made a comment. She goes, "I don't know why he's being dramatic with you because he doesn't do that with me." And quite frankly, those are kind of those truths, if you will, where children can sniff that out who has the actual power. Okay. Thirdly, let's look at granted power. This is power assigned by others. You may or may not coincide with your actual power. So this could be siblings grant power to the youngest sibling to make a decision in a stressful situation. As the youngest, he or she may not perceive themselves to be in power in the family role. And we kind of granted my sister this power. She planned our mother's 60th birthday. And so normally I'm pretty active and I would have taken the lead on that. But my younger sister took the initiative there. We kind of granted her that power, if you will. But they kind of anointed me when we had to bury our late father. I became the executor of the estate, and so they granted me that power, if you will. So granted power is assigned by others. So this slide you want to focus, and this is very important. A lot of you all who work in the corporate business sector may be familiar with French and Raven's power bases. These are the 5 power bases, if you will. You have reward power, coercive, expert, legitimate, and referent power. And we did discuss this in previous seminars and lectures in the class. But first, let's take a look at what reward power is. Reward power is granted because of one's ability to offer rewards or incentives. So, for example, you complete a chore so that your parents will give you the keys to the car or gas money. You may say, "Hey, hon, if you fold the laundry, I'll make sure that I do X, Y, Z, or whatever it may be." You kind of get it. Essentially, kids, if you clean your room, you can play the Nintendo Switch. That's an example of reward power. The second form of power is coercive. This one I want you to focus on is negative, but this is granted because of one's ability to inflict or use punish or remove rewards. So, for example, you may clean a sibling's room so they don't tell on you for breaking a curfew. One that brings up a pretty interesting situation that I've heard of is that, people, I don't want to say it's necessarily a threat, but someone's got some intel or something on you. So they say, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to tell mom about such and such if you don't give me 20 bucks." And some of us have been coerced, if you will, before. The third power basis is expert power. This is granted based on one's expertise and knowledge. A parent who lets a child choose a family computer because of their technology expertise. Some of your children know how to work your phone better than you, okay? And they could be the expert. We also see this too as well with students who are bilingual, more specifically. Their parents may not be native English speakers. However, their children are bilingual. And so oftentimes I remember when I was selling investments in insurance, I remember a time where I was speaking to a Hispanic family, and literally the child was talking to me in Spanish and translating to the parent. And I found that to be enormously remarkable because here you had a child, I'd say he was no older than 12 or 13, translating. And so I'm sure that mother and father relied on their child for expert power. We also see this right now with Dr. Fauci, who's helping leading the national crisis that we're dealing with coronavirus. He has what we would call expert power because of his expertise and or knowledge. Okay, take politics aside, your emotions, whether you like the person or not, that individual does have expert power. The fourth one is legitimate power, which is granted based on one's position or role in the family. So, because I'm mommy or daddy, or because I said so, so this is granted based on one's position or role in the family. Oftentimes, I'm the oldest of four, and so I tend to think I can just always, make those decisions by having legitimate power. But I have to recognize that there's three other siblings out there that can make that call too as well. And then lastly, we have referent power. This power is granted based on respect and admiration for the relationship. So you may comply with the aunt's request because you really like her and you enjoy spending time together. Some of us in here, we like certain people. Think about that person that you would run through a wall for, and not literally, but based on the respect or admiration that you have for that relationship. And so I remember working with the gentleman, Mr. Taylor. This guy was in his 80s, still working full time. And anytime he spoke, I literally, he was many levels behind me in terms of the organization. But anytime Mr. Taylor talked, I had this reverence for him. And we still see it today. I know a lot of people think you don't have it, but some of you all have this ability. Some of you all who are teachers, you may say, well, why does such and such student come and talk to me, but not to their own teacher? Well, they probably revere you, and you have a very good relationship with that individual. And these are what we call French and Raven's five power bases. Okay? So when we look at rules defined in terms of family rules, each of our families have their own unique rules that are germane to the family. Rules that we look at are a followable prescription that indicates what behavior is obligated, preferred, or prohibited in certain contexts. And this is by Shemanoff, 1980. So some dated research, but it still stands the test of time. And when we look at rules, they must be able to be followed and be reasonable. And these behaviors may be obligated or required. So maybe you have to go to church every Saturday, Sunday, or Friday, or religious services. We have behaviors that are preferred or desired. I would prefer if you didn't have people in our house when mom and dad are not home. And then we have some things that are prohibited or forbidden. These could be things such as you are not moving in with your boyfriend or girlfriend unless you're married, etc. So think back in your family. Did you have rules or behaviors that were obligated or required, preferred, prohibited, etc.? Okay. So discipline in families. We have verbal punishment. This can include yelling, screaming, shouting, swearing, name calling, and threatening. And this has a potential to damage one's self-esteem. We also have corporate punishment. This is where there's the use of physical force to control a behavior, which includes slapping, spanking, or hitting. There are parents out there that do spank their kids. There are parents that do not or don't believe in that. Some of you all in here, and I want to be sensitive, we've been in some verbal and physical relationships that have been very harmful to our self-esteem. If you're in those type of relationships, how do you get out of that? And if you have been in those relationships, I'm sure you try not to go back, and I want to be very sensitive to that. Research shows that this type of punishment is more often associated with verbal aggression and violent behavior. So typically it's seen in the communication field as negative or bad style of communication. I'm not here to tell you as a parent what's the best thing to do and what's the worst thing to do, but as a parent, you have to make up your own mind for that, okay? So let's look at parenting styles. Parenting styles are defined as a general approach to discipline in the family. All of us have different parenting styles, and we have what's called the four parenting styles. We have authoritarian, permissive, authoritative, and uninvolved parents. And this isn't to make you feel uncomfortable, but I want you to first think as I narrate the next slide, what kind of family did you grow up in, or what kind of parenting styles were your mom and dad or your guardian? And then I want you to think about it for those of us who have kids, what type of parenting styles do you invoke, okay? So let's take a look at this illustration, which is really good. And this just shows the four parenting styles. Let's start in the upper left-hand corner with permissive. When we look at permissive parenting styles, These are parents that are low in control of their children, okay, or the household, but they are super high in support. You may say, well, how is that possible? So, low in control means that maybe there's less rules, okay, but your parents are super supportive of you. They're positive. They're going to be right there for you. And notice the axes there for those math persons out there, kind of how that looks, okay? Let's look in the upper right. Authoritative parenting styles are where your parents are high in control and there's high in support. Here's an example. Let's say you were getting ready to go to college. It's your senior year. You really want to go to Michigan, but mom and dad went to Michigan State, okay? And we're just using that as a rivalry. Well, high in control, they're saying, we're going to support you, but you're going to Michigan State. Some of us have been in those authoritative families where they are super supportive, but they're high in control, meaning mom and dad are alums of Michigan State. So although we recognize and we know that you want to go to Michigan, you are going to Michigan State. That's where we're sending our tuition dollars. Let's take a look at the bottom left, uninvolved parenting. These are parents that are low in control, so low rules, minimal rules of that, and they're really not supportive. I want to be sensitive because all of our families have these four types. If you look at our whole entire family extended, we all can point to our cousin there, aunt, uncle, etc. Uninvolved parent, and I don't want you to think these parents are bad or there's one that's better than the other, but uninvolved parents are very low in control and low in support. You know, they may say, "Hey, let's use the same college example." They may say, if we're looking at it low in control, "Hey, go wherever you want to go." But unfortunately, if you don't want to go, you don't have to, which shows that low support. And then authoritarian. This is where it's high in control, low in support. So going off of college, again, you better go to Michigan State. However, there's little or minimal support there. And these are what we call the four parenting styles. So Marwell and Schmidt have 16 compliance gaining strategies in terms of getting people to do things that you want them to do. And this is defined as approaches used to influence behaviors, attitudes, and communication. So the first one is rewarding activity, punishing activity, expertise, activation of impersonal commitments, activation of personal commitments. And let's take a look at what those look like more specifically. Okay, so compliance, levels of influence. This is where you agree with request in order to receive an award or avoid punishment. And there are three elements that must be present for compliance. So substitute compliance with getting someone to do what you want them to do. There's three elements. The first is concern. This is the other person genuinely cares about your interest, okay? The second part is control, the other's ability to actually enact the reward and the punishment. And then the third aspect is scrutiny, others' ability to effectively monitor your own behavior. The next one we have is identification, which is complying with requests based on respect and admiration for the other person. So some of us, you only think about you work in an organization. Let's say you work at Starbucks, okay? And you really, really like Heather. Heather is super energetic, she's charismatic, but Heather's the assistant manager. Mike is the store manager or the manager, right? He may ask you to do something, you really don't do it, but because you love Heather, you're friends with her, she connects with you. That's what we call identification. And I know I gave you a non-family example. This can be applicable to anything that we're dealing with in our lives, okay? The third aspect, internalization, is where we adhere to requests because it aligns with your personal value system. So it's the right thing to do. And this is the most long lasting change in behavior. So we adhere to a request because it aligns with your personal value system. Don't go out here and judge your friend on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram because they make a decision, right? We all have things that are germane to us and we feel, hey, that's the right thing to do, that's the wrong thing to do. But this is most long lasting change in behavior. We have something called the chilling effect in power in families. The chilling effect is a lack of communication in the relationship. And, right now, a lot of us are spending a lot of time at home right now. But when you look at the chilling effect, this is where there's a lack of communication in the relationship. You have things such as topic avoidance. So maybe you don't talk or discuss money. Maybe you don't discuss intimacy with what's going on between your spouse. You may not discuss a new job opportunity. You may not discuss religion. you can think of a myriad of topics where people just choose to have topic avoidance. And some of our families were very, very open, but some families choose to avoid topics of discussion. This often results from the other's perceived power. One with the greatest amount of power is often the one enacting the chilling effect, if you will. So that concludes our slides for this week. Once again, we did go through this entire chapter. This was power and discipline in families. I hope that you all learned an incredible amount today. Next week, I will be posting, we'll talk about communication and culture within the family, but please feel free to play this often. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.